right, everybody. So today, back on the podcast, we have Pete Rubish. How we doing, man?
Pretty good. It's just been a lot going on. Just came off the training for the 100-mile race that didn't quite end the way I wanted, and that was taking up a lot of time. Getting back into lifting now, so just been it's been a really busy
Yep.
last year, really.
Yeah, but we were just talking about the last two times you've been on the podcast, and the first time was 3 years ago. I can actually find the exact date here, but it's crazy because yes, that was May 1st, 2021, so just over 3 years ago. And at that time, like the Pete Rubish, I knew he was like the 900-pound deadlifter, right? And you were going through the journey of like coming off everything and kind of like, do I go completely natural or TRT and all that stuff. And I did see you were getting back into lifting on there, and I remember thinking like, this is the one time ever when I might be stronger than Pete Rubish, because every other time in the last decade, way stronger, and I'm sure going forward you will get that back very quickly. But yeah, man, I've been watching that journey for sure.
Yeah, I'm excited to get back into lifting because I came off everything that everybody knows, like November 2020, 3.5 years ago, and those few years after that, I just felt kind of burnt out on lifting. It just wasn't as exciting, obviously, seeing your strength go down, your
Sure.
weight go down, and then coupled with like a lot of issues with back pain. I
Mhm.
really mentally wasn't there to like push it. And now, after this kind of running phase, there's this revival feeling of sorts, and I'm just like really excited to get back into powerlifting and push things as high as I can take them, drug free, obviously, at this point, and just try to fill out the 220 class because right now
Mhm.
I'm 199 pounds.
Okay.
So
So for
I'd
the
like
people who maybe don't know, you got into I don't know what year you got into lifting, probably similar to me. Do you remember what year you started lifting?
2006.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Sounds about
basically, I mean, maybe a year or two after me. And I just remember seeing you, I guess it was on the forums, maybe people on like T Nation were talking about you, but I just remember you were really strong, crazy deadlift. What were some of the highest numbers you hit?
So the highest squat was 772 pounds in knee sleeves and a belt. Bench was 463 in competition, and the squat was as well in competition. 485 in training for bench, and then a deadlift was 871 in competition and 920 pounds in training. And this was all at the in the 242 class. So typically I'd be walking around about 253 and I would just cut down to make 242. And that's where all those numbers happened. Whereas now I'm like 199 pounds. So bit of a
So
con.
yeah, no, I mean the crazy numbers, of course. And you were like early to mid 20s hitting those, is that right?
Yeah, so I think my best numbers, I was 25 or 26, which you'll see a lot more of nowadays because guys get into PEDs younger, which I did as well. And so the peak actually comes younger. So you'll see a lot of guys from that 20 to 25 time frame hitting their biggest numbers. And then at that point, the injuries accrue and they just can't sustain the pace. And that's almost when things start to drop off, which sounds kind of crazy at like 25.
Yeah. No, for sure though. I mean, you do see like when you go so extreme on things, I mean, one of the nice things I think with the natural lifting realm is that it can kind of be spread out over so long, because the progress slows and if you really stick with it, you really can continue to hit, little bits here and there of progress along the way. But I've certainly seen a lot of people, and like you said, some of it's not that they couldn't possibly have gone further. It's either that an injury happens, health issues arise, or some reason that they have to come off, and so just inevitably they don't hit those numbers again. Because you started getting enhanced around what, like 2021?
Yeah, I was 20 years old. So by the time I hit my best numbers, that was about 6 years on cycles, and body was getting pretty beat up. I didn't really place, and these are the mistakes, looking back now, I wish I would have done differently that I've really shored up now that I'm drug free because you almost have to. You have to like really dot your I's and cross your T's to maximize progress. So I didn't take nutrition and diet seriously at all. I didn't take mobility work and warm-ups seriously at all. Um, so I heavily relied on just youth and PEDs and such. And I wish I'd really tied it all together. And I think I could have made even, a little further progress than what I did.
Yeah. But it's
Less.
great that you're documenting so much of it because the reality is even with I mean, we'll get into what you've been doing lately with these crazy runs you've been going on, but even with all of that, you are still an impressive individual. And, of course, genetics play a factor. I honestly don't know how much of a factor your previous gear use would play at this point. I mean, people for a few years were talking about, well, it permanently increases your ability to maintain muscle and everything. I think we clearly see that in people who go on TRT, people who blast. We talked about this in our last podcast. People who blast and then they come back to 1 to 200 milligrams of TRT. Many examples of this. John Meadows was one where the guy was I don't know 5'6" and maintaining 220 on 1 to 200 milligrams of TRT. You definitely see that, but it really seems like people who go off completely, they just tank and everything more or less comes off. And so I don't really know if it's super relevant at this point that you've been off for what, like almost 7 years, 6 or 7 years, something like that. Or you were on TRT for a while though after that, I guess, right?
Yeah, so I've been off 3.5 years, and actually, what you're saying echoes my sentiments as far as what I've experienced. So there were times um, running high TRT, even 250 a week, but there were also times where I ran 100 a week, 100 milligrams, and my strength levels barely dipped, and my size, I was still holding 250 pound body weight on minimal test, 100, 125 milligrams a week. I was still 250 pounds, 240 pounds in that realm with most of my muscle mass, and I was still deadlifting 840 pounds.
Well,
So I felt like testosterone period, like I maintained a lot of it. It wasn't 900, but it was 840, and it was most of that. And then when I came off everything, like it just all came off, so to speak. It's been like a slow regression for years as far as the
yep.
losing size and strength. And it's over time, but it was almost years of just like bleeding muscle and strength. And so now, and I got my labs done a month ago, the latest, and this was with running crazy high mileage, but the testosterone level was 404
Okay.
and GL, and I
When was
think it's
that?
now with a good diet I'm on. Like I've really cleaned up my diet, and I'm not running a crazy amount. I'm lifting hard, so I think it's possible it could be in the 500, 600 again. And I did hit 500 at one point for
When
total.
was it 404? Just recently?
Yeah, it was like exactly a month ago.
Okay. So it's so interesting to me because honestly, like I would never want to tell anybody to go on gear, but I'm sure many other people have thought this that like if you were to say, hey, I want that, I want to be big for my life, it almost seems like the way to do it would be okay, go hard for several years, gain as much. Not, I mean, this is obviously not advice, and I really would hope nobody would take it that way, but it would just seem that it would be like, hey, get in, put on the muscle mass, and then you could cut back to, let's say, 100 milligrams of TRT and just kind of cruise on that for, potentially indefinitely, depending on if you want kids and whatnot. But it seems like people really maintain so much of it. And I still, we still don't know necessarily all of the potential health ramifications of that and even be that much heavier. Like, even if you got all your blood work and everything was great, would it be good to be walking around at 250 pounds and lifting that heavy? I mean, who knows? But compare that and say, hey, I'm going to maintain 85, 90% of a totally geared up physique and strength, but do it on basically taking almost nothing. But I think that, there's definitely potential consequences with that. And I think that most people in almost all instances should stay natural. I mean, unless there's like a really good reason for it. And I remember thinking, like, why physiologically would that be the case? If you, like, let's say your testosterone was 100 milligrams. I mean, 250 is obviously still quite high, but 100 milligrams of testosterone, your total testosterone might have been somewhere between 5 to 700 realistically, maybe 800. It was higher
I can tell you this. I
on
have
100.
labs from 125 milligrams a week.
Okay.
I was at 1470.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
And that
So
was when were you doing like a single dose and then you tested a week later, or how were you doing that?
this was single dose tested 3 days post injection. That's how I like to do it to kind of cover the half-life.
Get the
So
meal.
I was
Yeah, yeah.
doing a peak, but it was one shot a week. Basically, half a cc is 125 milligrams because it's 250 per cc. And I was in the 14, I want to say it was about 1470 or something, which is absurd.
That is,
Com
yes, that's still quite high. And so let's just say proportionally then 100 milligrams would have had you at like, somewhere between 11 and 1200. So that is still quite high. So, I mean, you're talking 2 to 3 times what you currently would be natural. Because I always wonder, like, is it a lot of people report like this big drop after they come off everything. And it's kind of like, well, what if hypothetically you magically skipped that drop and you just like, let's say you were peaked out to 250 pounds, right? Snap your fingers, you're natural again. You're naturally producing 700, let's say, nanograms per deciliter, enough testosterone to get your blood there. There was never this drop in recovery period. How much of that 250 would you now maintain? Is to say that is it the big drop that happens for months or is it just, hey, you just have total lower testosterone? My guess is it's both because obviously there is going to be that big drop. But I've heard a number of people say what you're saying, which is that, hey, yes, there was like a significant drop initially, but also it was exactly as you described, this slow bleed of muscle for years. This is why it's always so ridiculous when you get some of these people who say, oh, I come off totally and I lose nothing. It's like, yeah, you've been on for 2 months and you had some long ester gear in your body. Of course, you didn't lose anything. So it seems like it's probably both. But it is amazing some of the stories I've heard where it's like it's 3 years later and I'm still losing some. And it's just, I guess the body just eventually does get back to where it was going to be.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I mean, I don't know what else you need to say then. Like the difference from 250 pounds to basically exactly 200 pounds where I'm at now. And a lot of that has been all the cardio, and I've tried to lean out and get, as healthy as possible because a lot of my motivation, um, in terms of that was what you touched on, where I don't want to be walking around at this really heavy weight to where it's so much more strain on the body. Your sleep quality, sleep apnea, that sort of stuff, blood pressure goes up, higher resting heart rate. Like I didn't want to deal with all of these complications, which I had dealt with for about a decade. It
Mhm.
just isn't worth it when you're at this stage of life and you have a 2-year-old and you have a family and it's just almost like, all right, it's time to grow up and like
Yeah.
get help. So I love lifting and I feel the passion I felt many years ago again, kind of reinvigorated now. And I want to get as strong as possible, but I want to do it, like I said, drug free and not pushing past, maybe 210, 215 pounds body weight, which would take significant time to grow into as well.
Yeah.
So it's just everything's changed as far as that, but the love of strength is still there. I want to see what I can do without
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and really a lot of the last 5, 10 minutes of conversation was all just to say that as impressive as the previous physique and strength levels were, you're still an impressive individual. I mean, even after all of this running, 199 pounds, relatively lean, I can see the bicep veins and whatnot. And even your starting lifts that just posted, I'd like to get back into it, are still good numbers. Of course, not like what you're doing, but there's a lot of people who cannot do that. And so it'll be interesting to see how much you get back because obviously strength has a huge neural component. And so as you get back to that heavy lifting, plus, I mean, you've been doing so much running, there's no way that wasn't significantly impacting you. So I bet over the next year, maybe even over the next 6 months, you're going to see some huge jumps.
That's what I'm kind of hoping. I'm banking on almost newbie gain type progress because I mean we touched on it, but I was running multiple weeks of 80, 90, 100-mile weeks, which is just an absurd amount of cardio. And then
Yes.
the lifting, I really didn't lift hardly at all.
Wow.
In the lead up to that race because I was spending so much time and energy on the running, which wasn't, it proved to be a vital mistake. It was one of the issues that I think played a role in not finishing, getting to 66 miles instead of 100, but that's a lesson learned on another day. But yeah, so it's almost like starting fresh right now. And the other component to now that's completely different from any other point in my life is uh, I'm taking my diet so much more seriously as far as eating the right things, getting enough protein. And that's never been a factor before because like I said, I will also, I think it'll help with strength, but I also want to be healthy. So I cleaned up the diet completely. Um, I'm super lean right now. I really don't throw up pictures like shirtless and stuff, but it would you guys would see. It's definitely I feel like I'm single digit body fat.
Do it. I'll be waiting. We got Instagram up.
Yeah, I got it. No, I think a lot of times people and they see you, you know how it is. They see you in clothes,
Sure.
especially as a drug-free athlete, and they may say like clothes, they see you in a picture in a shirt or whatever online, and they're like, well, he's not that big. But then it's almost like we see this with natural or drug-free lifters, shirtless, they look insanely impressive. So it's almost like, yes, you're not as impressive as someone on PEDs in a shirt, but like it's a different game shirtless, and I've seen that a
Sure.
lot.
Yep,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, I mean, dude,
Size.
199 single digit body fat is big because I think you're about my height, right? 6 foot, 6'1".
Exactly 6 feet. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's big, man. And so where are you at right now with your current numbers when you tested them?
So the squat was 386. I definitely believe I had 408, 185 kilos. But I just didn't want to push it any further at that point. It moved well. That was just with a belt on, no knee sleeves. And then bench was 270 with a pretty good pause, pretty long pause. Maybe 5 more pounds on that one, 5 to 10. And then deadlift was 502, and that was with a belt. And again, maybe at 10 to 15 pounds in the tank. So that was roughly 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
And already after 2 weeks, to 2 full weeks of training, I feel significantly stronger than I did then. So I think those numbers would be upwards of 20, 30 pounds higher now.
Okay. What got you to decide to want to run and especially do a 100-mile run?
Back in like 2008, around that time period, 2007, I ran a marathon. I had no running background at all. I just decided I was going to train for this marathon. I did like a 4:24, which isn't great at all, but I was 15. Did that just for the challenge of it. And then kind of started following ultra running. I was fascinated by it. Actually, like had heard about David Goggins when like he
Mm,
was still very underground. It was like 2009. Nobody really knew about him, but I kind of heard about when he started. This is when he started, what he was doing.
hmm
So I followed the sport. I was a fan of it. There were a few notable like 100-mile races in the mountains out west, and it was kind of like a bucket list thing I've always wanted to do. It's just like one of them. Um, so the Bighorn 100, it's in northern Wyoming, kind of on the border with Montana, and that was the one I picked because when I was a kid, we went out to the Bighorn Mountains. I fell in love with them on the way to Yellowstone. They're as beautiful as Yellowstone, just without all the people. So I decided to do that one. And the timing for it, as far as like wanting to do it this year, was like I said, I was just burnt out on lifting. Like it wasn't fun when you were getting weaker constantly and losing size all the time from coming off PEDs and constant back pain. And I just was like checked out, so to speak, on powerlifting. And
sure.
I needed a challenge. So I put a year and a half into this effort to like train for this race and really truly like gave it everything I had. Um, and that's kind of what's kept me busy for the last year and a half. And then the conclusion of it was the race on the 14th of June. And I made it 66 miles. So didn't finish it, learned a lot of lessons, a lot of rookie mistakes, a lot of things went wrong on race day that I wasn't anticipating. Almost like my first powerlifting meet, I just
Mm,
didn't know. There was a lot of experience, like lack of experience. So I think the fitness was there to finish. I think there were a lot of mistakes as far as like being the first ultra and not knowing the problems that were going to crop up. That kind of ended things. So I just needed a break from like lifting heavy, like mentally I wasn't there anymore. And now I'm fired up. I'm as fired up as I've been since when I was hitting PRs,
yeah.
which is fun again.
Yeah, I do think that's such a huge aspect to it because I remember thinking there was this kid in college and I didn't know him when he was on gear. I just remember seeing him afterwards and people who I knew who knew him said that he was so much smaller and whatnot. And he had basically just stopped lifting. And I've seen that throughout. And I think part of it is like, let's say you're going to lose 20 pounds of muscle if you just stop lifting and come off gear, right, for a given person versus maybe if you kept lifting, you're going to lose, 12 pounds of muscle, right? So if you just look at the end result, then it's like, yes, of course, you'd rather lose 12 pounds of muscle than 20 pounds of muscle. But in that example, in the one, maybe if you completely step away from the training and everything, it's not as hard mentally. Yes, you are aware you've lost that muscle, but maybe you just see it when you go into the shower, you wear different clothing, whatever. It's not constantly on your mind. Versus if you're going to say, hey, I'm going to lift and maintain as much as I can, but you are going to lose only 12 pounds of muscle, that still means pretty much every time you're going to the gym and doing this thing that you used to love, it's horrible. It's making you so aware of everything you're losing. I'm weaker this time, I'm weaker this time, I'm weaker again this time that I'm sure has to be extremely hard. So like I just think of like when I dieted the hardest and how much that sucked to lose some muscle and strength. And I'm talking, realistically, would he lose maybe a couple pounds of muscle, a little bit of strength here and there? I can only imagine the stress of losing 20, 30 plus pounds of muscle. So I do understand why some people do just have to say, hey, you know what? I'm just doing something completely different. I think Dorian Yates went through something like that too, where initially it was very hard and he got into maybe it was biking or something else. Because like I mean, obviously some people do continue to lift, but I get that psychologically that could be very difficult.
Yeah, that was exactly it. It wasn't fun anymore. And to some extent, you need enjoyment from it to continue pushing it. Um, and now I feel that again. So I'm thankful for that. And like by comparison with running the extreme mileage, like lifting is way more fun. It's
Mhm.
just so much. The one thing that all the running did for me was it made it to where every aspect of like powerlifting and eating properly and all that is easy now. Like mobility
Yeah.
work, like it's all fun. It's all easy compared to going out in the heat and being gone for 6 hours at a time or whatever. Because that was just a different kind of challenge. It wasn't ever fun. It was rewarding.
Yeah, I just can't imagine, man. I say this a lot. Like even when I was 30, I wanted to hit the best mile time that I had hit. And honestly, looking back at it, like the training I did for it was very minimal. I was basically doing once a week where I would test it and I would do actually, you know what? I didn't even test it because I hate longer runs. I can't stand them. So my training, I wasn't even doing miles. I was just doing intervals of 1 to 2 minutes at a time. I would do like 6 1-minute intervals or something like that. And then when the day came, I said, okay, I'm just going to push it. And that is what I did. I was like, I literally had not even run a full mile up to that point. I was just doing intervals and some low intensity stuff, whatever. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to do it. And I did the mile and I hit it and it was tough. But anytime I would train for it, or even today, like if I do sprints, I was telling Brian Borstein the other day, I was like, dude, every time I do it, like let's say I'm going to do 8 intervals. I'm at like 4 or 5, and I'm just like, screw this. I'm done doing intervals. I'm not doing this again. And I always push through it, and then I'll do it again 3 days later, or whatever it is. Like I always do it. And so I'm amazed by the people who can push for like full marathons and certainly 100-mile races. I mean, people talk about they're so hardcore with lifting, and it's like, look, I've done insane leg workouts. I get it. It is very difficult, but I just don't think you can compare doing a super heavy squat or even like a breathing set of squats, right? 20 reps. Okay, it's 2 minutes of hell, whatever it is, compared to I'm about to go in and do a 4 hour run is just crazy, and just how much you have to get into the zone. To me, the latter is so much worse.
Yeah, it was, man, I think about how much I put into the training. And that was one of the mistakes. Like I said, I ran a lot of similar to lifting, the same concept applies. There was a lot of junk volume in there.
Mhm.
Did way too much that wasn't necessary or building any fitness at that point. And if I'd cut that back and put that time into lifting, I think I would have been in better shape. Specifically because right off the bat, I was dealing with major cramping issues, which the science tends to point towards rather than an electrolyte issue or hydration or all that. A lot of it's muscular related
Hmm.
as far as the muscles not being conditioned to that intensity. And I did nothing but hill work in the training and all that. And I'd taken plenty of electrolytes on race day and I was drinking plenty. I was hydrated. But the cramping right off the bat from like mile 7 onward was pretty debilitating. That threw,
Wow, that early.
yeah, the race was twice as hard as I even expected. And I knew it was going to be really, really hard. And like it starts off from about mile 3.5 to 7. And over that 3.5 miles, you're climbing like 3,000 feet. So it's just a massive climb, roughly 1,000 feet of gain per mile. So it's straight up. And by the end of that, my quads were just cramping. My VMO, vastus medialis, were just locking on me completely. And then I went to stretch them, and then my hamstring cramped. And then the other leg started cramping, and I just fell over. There's nothing I could do. And then that happened again like a mile later. And at this point, I'd had about 10 electrolyte capsules and I was hydrated. So I was just like, what the heck is going on? And it was from the intensity of the climb. Like it was such a massive climb. Like my body wasn't ready for that. And that's where something where I think like doing a lot of split squats and unilateral work before the race would have helped me a lot. But I just kind of slacked on that stuff and just got by with mileage. So that proved to be a major error uh, that I was unprepared for. And I kind of, even if I think about this, I'm like, if I had had some taurine or something, I wonder if that would have helped quite a bit.
Did you have a coach or anything through this?
No, that was another major mistake. Like truthfully, coaches will prevent you from doing things that are stupid, that will hurt you, that you don't need to do. And I had two buddies doing the race, and they had done ultras before. They'd done many of them, not 100 miles, but they'd done a lot of 50s and 50Ks and such. And they had the experience. They both had coaches. They ran a lot lower mileage than I did in training. Like that was the funny part. Like I ran a lot higher mileage, and they smoked me. Um, and that's just one of those things. It's like having a coach, having someone who says stops you from hurting yourself. Like you don't need to do all this volume. Why are you doing it? Junk volume. What's the point of this? What do you get from that extra time, that extra effort? It could be hurting you. And that's where, I made those mistakes and they had the experience I didn't, and they knew what was going to happen. They knew stuff that comes up. I was unprepared for these things because
Mhm.
there were a lot of other things that went wrong. And that's the value of a coach. So they kicked my butt, like both of them, destroyed me.
What
And
would be a typical time or a reasonable time for a 100-mile race?
really depends on the terrain. So they're very dependent on terrain. That's why it's deceptive. Marathons generally, most of the cities, there are some tough ones, but most of the cities try to make them as flat as possible to aid PR times. Like people don't want to sign up for marathons unless they're going to hit a PR.
Mhm.
So most of the courses they try to make as flat as possible. That's generally how it is. In a marathon, you will have roughly 400 feet of elevation gain, right? In this race, there was 18,500
Wow.
over 4 times the distance. So it's like an absurd amount because it's never flat. It's never flat. You're either going up or down. You're in the mountains. It's very remote. You can't just pull a car up and like leave, it's not like that. But my buddy finished 35th out of 320, and he
Okay.
had a time of just under 27 hours. And he's the one
27 hours. Oh my
that's
gosh.
fast.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure it is fast. And that's yeah, I mean, I'm sure if I would have actually thought it out, I'm just thinking of like, what time people do for marathons, like you said, 3, 4+ hours. That's insane, man. So
Well,
obviously you don't sleep during that, so you're just pushing through everything. What happens if people can't, like you couldn't finish, right? So what happened? Somebody had to come pick you up?
yeah, so just to circle back real quick, that guy who did that, my buddy, he's a 2:45 marathoner.
Okay.
And he did 3 straight marathons under 3 hours over 3 weeks, like right before the race. Just like casual, like just three straight three sub threes. And then my other buddy did 33 hours, and he's about so the one guy he's 170 pounds, the other guy's about 180, and he did 33, and I just got smoked by them both. I couldn't finish, but yeah. So
They're
what
not
happened?
that small then. I mean, 170 to 180, unless they're super tall. It's not like they're like string beans.
No, no, they lived. I mean, they've got muscle. It's there were people I saw there who were didn't look like physically impressive, but they kicked my tail, and that's
Yeah.
that's the humility of it all. I got humbled real fast. Um, because it doesn't matter what you look like, it doesn't matter any of that. But the question about if you can't make it, what do you do? Well, there's three spots on the whole course that you can basically get driven out of. So you have to make it back to one of them. So you could be smoked and you still got to hike back to one of those points to hitch a ride out, which is what I had to do. I mean, I was completely destroyed. I had nothing left. My miles were like, at that point, 45 minutes, and I was just death marching because every step hurt like it was excruciating every step. But I just had to keep going because that's the only way out. You have to go back to one of those spots.
So
And
you
then
have to know which one is the closest between, whichever two you're closest to. And then you might have to go backwards, essentially, like you said.
yeah, so I was going forwards, but it was the longest couple of miles of my life. Um,
So you were only a couple miles away, thankfully.
but it took hours. Like it took hours at that point. I had nothing. I mean, it's kind of crazy. The cramping was a major issue because it slowed me down massively right off the bat. Like I was going along at a good clip. I felt like I was right on pace, what I needed to do. And then I got really freaked out by the cramping because I kept feeling the twitching and pulsating in my like quads. And so like the cramps were threatening for the next 30 miles until it finally cooled off enough and we got high enough up in the mountains. Um, but that slowed me down significantly because I kept being worried like I go too fast, it's gonna happen again. And I was pounding electrolyte caps. I took about 50 over the whole race. And I was hydrated, peeing clear for most of the race, and it didn't matter. So that slowed things down. But the other thing was the gels. So the gels were never an issue in training, but at mile 27, the gels started to become a major issue.
Can you
That's what
just
it was.
clarify what you mean by the gels?
So like in running, we have these like basically these gel things. I actually have some right here, and you just have like two an hour. I can take one out. So you have one of these every half hour, and it's 100 calories, 24 carbs. So you're having that coupled with liquid calories, about 250 calories an hour for fueling. Well, it was fine for 27 miles. And then at 27 miles, they started just like giving me, I mean, I got to be straight up like bad diarrhea. So that went on for 39 miles, where you're in the middle of nowhere. There's not porta potties. There's not anywhere like you have to pull off in the woods. You have wet wipes or whatever. But 39 miles of that problem basically ended my race because I could no longer fuel at all. And I didn't have any Imodium or anything, which I didn't know. Like now I would carry Imodium, I'd take it beforehand, and I would have different gels. But that's more or less what was the problem that cut things short.
That's
Um,
crazy.
it's hard. It's a weird subject to talk about, but like when you're covering that kind of distance, if that happens and you can't get it under control from the gels, and that's what it was that was causing it, there's not much you can do. Like that's really what cut it short. I couldn't get it under control. And it was if I just had Imodium, I would have been fine, but I didn't know.
Wow. Yeah, never would have even thought about that. So it sounds like you're carrying a decent amount of stuff. I mean, are you carrying enough water for the whole 100 miles with you, or is there like stop points to fill it in?
Yeah, there's aid stations roughly every 2 hours where you refuel your water, and they'll often have soda, which you go with a lot because of the calories, like Mellow Yellow or Coke or whatever. I'd have like one bottle filled with that, the other bottle filled with electrolytes and water.
Carbonation doesn't bother people.
No, you just need the calories. The carbonation is really fine. It's just and there's also a bunch of food at these aid stations that you can pick up real quick, like little quesadilla things or fruit or whatever. You can grab some stuff, or you can just keep rolling with the gels. And That's how you refuel. But these are remote aid stations. They have to like pack things in by horseback and stuff
Wow.
like you can't just drive up. There's no points. It's completely out in the middle of the mountains.
Wow.
So it was just the cramping, the having to go to the bathroom constantly to the point it got excruciatingly painful. That really I couldn't go like that cut my brace. That's what ruined it. Those two factors, and then my feet became very blistered as well, which wasn't a problem until about mile 55. So the last 10 miles was when it became more of a problem because your feet are never dry. There are so many sections of periods where you're going through like 100 yards of mud that's shin deep. It's not just like a little bit of mud. It's like
What?
yeah, it's like mud up to your shins for 100 yards. And then you have to do that again in another mile and another, and it just keeps happening. There's just all this mud. And so your feet are never dry. And then there's about 20, 25 stream river crossings where you're like your feet are going in the water and you have to cross these streams in the mountains. So this leads to blisters. I had toe socks that were wool, so my toes didn't get blistered. They were actually great. But my heels, both heels, developed massive blisters, and then the bottom of my feet. And so it wasn't a problem until, like I said, mile 55-ish, and then it started getting really painful. Like every step was just like excruciating from all these blisters, and that was where a better choice of shoes would have helped. Um, my two buddies wore the same shoes. Like they had a pair that they knew was going to work. And
Are they just running shoes or?
yeah, they're like trail shoes. Everybody wears trail shoes, which I did as well. But the ones I had were really good in the mud. They were terrible on the rocks because the trail is always rocky. There's never a point where it's like just open and smooth. It's just like rocks everywhere that you're stepping on, mud all the time, and it's either up or down. There's never flat. So the shoe choice was the other thing that kind of cost me. So just a lot of rookie mistakes that I didn't know they didn't come up in training, and that cost me all those things.
Wow.
But
This is
really,
very different than I had imagined. I was basically thinking that the equivalent of four marathons. I mean, I had known that there were more trails, I suppose, but I didn't think about one, how long it was, and then two, I mean, just how much like you'd have to bring so much and that they're through all these trail. Like I didn't think you'd be going through streams and mud and stuff like that. I mean, to the extent you're talking about. So you mentioned that there's three potential points that you could leave. Is one of those at the end? Like, so for example, 33, 66, and 100, or is it there's three plus the end, so like 25, 50, 75 in the end?
so it's an out and back course. So you basically
Hmm.
you go 48 miles up to the top, which is about 9,200 feet, the top, and then you come back 52. So it finishes a little further than where it started. It finishes in town. It starts in the canyon because you climb out of the canyon right off the bat into the mountains. And you can basically, the only access points by car are a 2 hour drive from the nearest town, all of them. So there's three access points along the way, and then it's a 2 hour drive to get to them from the nearest town. So mile 13, Dry Fork, that's the first one you can get out at 13. So on the way back, that would be like 82. And then there's also mile 30, which is mile 66 on the way back. That's where I dropped. And that one is the hardest to get to because you have to have a four-wheel drive elevated vehicle because you have to drive into these rivers where they come up to your car. Like they would submerge your car fully if you weren't having like a Jeep or a truck. And then there's also these boulders in the run, like the road on the way there. So like it's really hard to reach that. That's the other one you can get out at. And then the other one was at the very top, mile 48 at the turnaround. And that's all a 2 hour drive. Like my wife and my dad drove up to that one. They didn't go to the 33. I had to like get a ride out from somebody else because of the boulders and the water.
So you have your cell phone on you during this time.
No, they have a GPS like tracker, like it's like you have a GPS on you, so they know where you're at because it's dangerous to get like lost, like in this very remote area of the country where there's no, I mean, that's the nearest town 2 hours away, like drive. That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. So it's
How did you signal that you needed help?
well, I had. I had my pacer with me for 36 miles, and he's actually a natural bodybuilder. I think he's a professional, actually. I think he got a pro card and everything. Sam Okinola. You're, he,
It
he's
sounds
he,
familiar, but I don't know
uh,
off the top of my head.
he's he paced me for a good part of it, and he's massive. He's like 220. Um,
Wow. Jeez, what a beast.
and he was with me, and you see other people on the trail, but you just basically walk back to the 66 point, and then you just let them know like. And I technically got there 20 minutes after the cutoff anyway, but I just had no energy. Like I couldn't get food down at that point because I every time I have anything, I have to go to the bathroom and it just
What do you mean after the cutoff?
yeah, there's certain like times along the way you got to make it to this checkpoint by this time, or you're not allowed to continue. So like there's
Wait, you had gotten, meaning you got there after you were supposed to, so technically you didn't qualify, you could say, to keep going.
if I had booked it before that, I could have made it, but I had no energy. Like I wasn't able to get gels down at that point. Um, because I just was having, like I was
Yeah,
having, it was painful. It was when going to the bathroom becomes excruciating, there's a problem. Okay. And that's really what like that's what stopped me. I'm not gonna like it's
yeah,
just one of those uncomfortable ultra marathon truths um that comes up. It's reality. It's a weird thing to think about because like that would never happen in day-to-day life. But
sure.
um
So I'm just trying to clarify, like, how would they know that somebody needed help? Like, do they just see, hey, the GPS isn't moving anymore?
that would be part of it. Now there's enough runners on the course where someone will come along. I mean, the other thing too, like, or the person would just death march back, which is kind of what I did. Like when I collapsed at mile 8 and 7, the mile 8.5, I literally collapsed into a marsh, and there were like flies buzzing all around me, and there were tons of runners at that point coming by behind me because this is early in the race. We're all pretty together at that point. And everybody's like, man, you okay? What do you need? You need help? And I'm like, I'm just cramping really bad. I can't stand up. My BMO like looked like it was torn, like it had buckled halfway into my quad. Like it had indented so hard into my quad from locking up. It was the craziest thing I've seen as far as a cramp. And I just was like, I gotta like rub it, wait it out. I took a bunch of electrolytes, tried to get that to help. So people are like nice. They try to,
Yeah, yeah.
saw someone really suffering, they'd be like, "Oh, you need help? We're trying to help you."
How long did you have to wait at that marker before somebody finally came?
At 66?
Yeah.
Well, so at that, it's like an aid station, so there's like 20 people there. Like
Okay.
that's like a whole, it's like an oasis. Like when you pull up on an aid station in these races, it's like an oasis. Like you're like, wow, okay, this is a party. They got everything you need. They say, what do you need? They
Yeah,
make
yeah.
water bottles and stuff. Um, Yeah, it's just bittersweet because I put my heart and soul into the whole train for it. Um, Basically only to be undone by like mistakes and
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, yeah, that's nice though that you had the, like, obviously once you're there, like you said, it's probably like finding, food and water in a desert or something. You're just like, this is amazing. And then, but like you still had to chill at that oasis, at the station for a little while before somebody finally came with the car or Jeep.
yeah, I was there for like an hour and a half waiting.
Yeah. Wow.
I don't know. I really never anticipated the thought of not finishing because I knew how hard I had trained and prepared.
Yeah, sure.
So that was mentally a difficult thing. And
When did you when did you start thinking like, you know what? I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep going all the way.
it didn't hit me until the first point where I was like, wow, I might not be able to do this as far as like the cutoff times were getting closer. My miles were getting longer. And then I was feeling, kind of bad. It was like mile 55. Like that point is where it first hit me. Like at no point before that did I think I was not going to finish. But then it started like creeping in where I started actually like doing the math and thinking about reality of what was going on and not being able to get my body under control. And I started to get a little nervous. And then the wheels just fell off after that. So,
Wow.
yeah.
This must happen to, obviously it must happen to other people. So I'm sure there's plenty of stories out. I also imagine there have to be some situations where somebody just couldn't make it back to one of the points. If your next like Oasis station, if your next one was 10 miles and you're just done. I mean, there have to be situations where they had to send people out there.
Yeah, they have search and rescue teams like helicopter and such. Because the only way in would be a helicopter or horseback.
Right.
They're like the only options out of those mountains because there's just no way to get in there otherwise. And that is a thing that comes up from time to time, which, that's a pretty hefty bill if search and
Yeah.
rescue fine. So that's kind of motivating where you're like, all right.
Yeah, I guess you'd have to pay for it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a thing like it's as remote as you could possibly even like entertain in your brain. Like it's I knew what I was getting into, but then when I got out there, it was still worse than I thought. Like that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Uh,
jeez. Man.
I kind of like want to redeem myself one day, but I'm so like amped about lifting right now. I have no desire to like push right now. I'm running 2 days a week, 8 miles instead of 80.
Yeah.
Um,
So
eight
you were
mile.
doing 80-mile runs in preparation for it.
No, not 80-mile distance, 80-mile weeks. So they look at, in ultra running, you look at the overall volume of the week a lot of times. And my peak week was 102 miles in like 5 days. Actually, so that it was shy of a week that I did that. Uh, but now I'm doing like 8 miles total for the week, 4 miles twice a
Gotcha.
week
Gotcha.
for cardio benefit, health benefit, stay in shape. And then I'm lifting 4 days. So I'm much more invigorated and like excited to lift and get as strong as possible. But it does kind of sit there in the back of my brain about like 2 or 3 years from now, knowing the course, knowing what's going to go wrong and like going out and getting redemption. Um, because going into it, I thought I was going to crush it. Like I thought I was going to be pretty good time, sub 30 hours. They give you 35 hours to get it done. And I thought I was going to crush it. And I got humbled hard. So it was like a real wake up call. But
So, and let's see. I mean, obviously, just there's got to be a range, but what's the oldest person you saw doing it?
oh my gosh. See, that's what's crazy about ultra running. People who are way older than you and who have, like don't look in shape can whoop your tail. Like it's so humbling, man. It's like you could be ripped out of your mind. It doesn't even matter. Um, I think I saw there was a guy who was like 66 who finished in like 29 and a half hours.
Wow.
And there was a lady I was running with for probably 10 miles and she was like 60 and
Wow.
she was very skinny, like just no body fat but no muscle kind of thing. And she was telling me all these stories. She was like, yeah, I've done like 50 100 milers and I've done Badwater twice, which is the 135 miles through Death Valley in July.
What?
Yeah, it's this stupid race. I respect the heck out of it. Goggins has done it like 3 times. I respect the heck out of that race, but I have no desire. It's in late July, so coming up, and it's 130, 120, 130 degrees, and they do 135 miles. And anyway, she done that one, and she was talking to me about that, and she'd done a bunch of other ones. And like these people are twice your age and just smoking you, and you're just like, all right, um, you get humbled,
I
man.
guess they did. Like, it's so hard for me to relate to that. But at the same time, I'm sure for many people, it's hard to relate to the bodybuilders who, either, hey, like they might be thinking, oh, these guys are so dumb for taking these horrible substances, or these guys are so crazy for stepping on stage in a thong and posing for people. Like, everybody's got something weird, I guess. But I just, I can't imagine being drawn to something like that Death Valley run.
It's not fun. It's rewarding when you do this stuff, but it's not fun. Like lifting to me is still somewhat fun. And my training now is I do the main power lift. Like one day I have 2 bench days, one squat day, one deadlift day. I do the main lift. After that, it's bodybuilding work. Like I want to get a crazy pump. I want to hit high reps. I want to isolate. Like that's fun. I love that pump. I love like trying to pack on size. So I'm with you. Running was never fun. It was a challenge. Uh, and it's just, I don't know. It's a different mental breed kind of thing.
And you said you weren't lifting at all during that time?
The last 2 months, I think I lifted like two upper body sessions.
Wow.
And
It's
then
honestly kind of insane that you have been able to, I mean, to be 199 pounds, like when you raced, you were 199 that day, or you were
I was
okay.
actually closer to 202. I
Yeah, so
lost
that, I mean, I've got to think either you just have crazy genetics and or something was maintained from being so big. It's so crazy to be that heavy and lean and not even be lifting while doing all that running. I mean, I would have to imagine that I would be like 165 or something if I was running that much and not lifting.
it's weird. I mean, the last 2 months or so, I lost about 40 on my bench in like that last 2 months. And part of this too was like, I haven't even said, but like back in April, I had to have two surgeries like back to back weeks in a row on a massive kidney stone. Like I did like
Oh, wow.
that. I could barely train, period. I could barely run in April. So like I tried to make up for it in May. So in April I ran like 100 miles total. In May I ran 385 because I could barely run in April with the back-to-back surgeries. There was a 24 millimeter kidney stone in my left side where like starting in February on my training runs, I would get this excruciating pain that would double me over and I couldn't continue. And it would just buckle me. Like, and I'd be like, the rest of the day, I couldn't even do anything. I couldn't even function. I couldn't sit in front of a computer because I was in so much pain for the next 5 hours after these runs. Um, and I thought something was seriously wrong. Like I thought I had diverticulitis or something because it was in that lower left abdominal region and I was peeing blood and all that. And I've been peeing blood off and on for like 3, 4 years. And it was a 24 millimeter kidney stone in the left kidney. And so they had to get it out. They had to like laser it down and then you pee it all out. And so I'd have two surgeries on that. They have to go in the first time they put a stent in from your kidney. It's a foot long, the stent is, and they put it from your kidney to your bladder. And when the stent's in, you feel like you gotta pee every 5 minutes. It's brutal. And you're peeing blood the whole time. And that was the worst part was the stent. It's just excruciating, like the worst pain of my life. And the kidney stone also. And then after the stent's been in a week, they go back in because the stent widens out your ureter. Your ureter is like 4 millimeters usually, and it widens it out so they can get up there to the kidney. And then they laser it down, and then you have to stent in another week, and then that's excruciating pain when they take that out. Um, it was just a wild month, man. It was brutal.
Jeez.
I
That was
never
this
want.
past April?
Yeah, I literally am like I'm never. I have the and I touched on this when I was learning about like SNPs and from Leo. Like I learned all the genetic stuff, the genes you can look up and such to find out your predispositions. He taught me all that um, from a cardiovascular standpoint. I think I still have the document. It's like a 10-page document of cardiovascular predispositions as far as genes. But I looked at the kidney stone ones. I had them all. I had all the SNPs that were like dominant for that, the alleles and all that. And my dad's had them, and
Was that so when you said you've been peeing blood for 3 to 4 years, you knew you had the kidney stones at that point?
yeah, so when I first was peeing blood, I was freaked out, obviously. I was like, what is this about? So I had a CT scan. They said there were three kidney stones, but they were like 2 to 3 millimeter, which is like whatever. They don't even mess with those. And then this pain was the worst pain of my life for months. It was excruciating. Like I can't describe how painful it was. And I went to get another CT scan. They're like, yeah, you got a 24 millimeter. Like that's massive. You got to get that out. Um,
Yeah, I mean that's
so
basically an inch.
yeah, it's one of the biggest ones they'd ever seen. And the nurse people, they said in like 10 years, they've never seen anybody in the OR for one that big. And it got bigger from all the running, being dehydrated and running. And and I think there were a couple other factors that I think really played a role. Like I didn't know about oxalates and stuff. So I was eating a lot of oxalate food, high oxalate. So like now I've cut out all nuts, I've cut out all potatoes, um, I've cut out raspberries, like all the things that have oxalates, I've cut out completely. I don't touch oxalates, like I'm terrified of them because I grow kidney stones really quick. And then too much vitamin D can grow these puppies. So my vitamin D levels are I'm like a hyper responder to it. I have absurd vitamin D levels. So
Really?
for a while I was taking 10,000 IU's a day.
Hmm.
My level was like 103 on the scale, which goes up to 100. I don't know, it went over the chart. And then I cut it back to 20,000 IU's a week. I would take a 10,000 Monday and Friday, and my level was still 99. So
Oh
I just
wow.
cut vitamin D completely. I'm like, I'm not going to take vitamin D, period. Because I want to be about 65
Hmm.
on the scale, and I'm always like 100. And
What are you now that you're not taking it?
I don't know, because the last one I had checked was when I was doing 20,000 a week. I use 10,000. I took a 10,000 IU pill Monday and Friday, and that was 99.
Okay.
So I was like, oh my gosh, I gotta stop. So I just dropped it because that's insane.
Why did you start taking it?
Just the health benefits, really, like the role on the immune system and such. Because I've seen so much blood work where people are not on it are always 25. Like I always see 25, 20, 15. Like this is where everyone who doesn't take it is at.
Hmm.
And so I think you obviously need it. And, even people taking a massive amount, taking 5,000, 10,000 a day, I would see them around like, okay, they're at 70. Well, on 20,000 a week, I'm at 99. I'm just like, oh my goodness.
How long were you doing the 20,000 a week when you retested?
About 6 months because before that I was doing 10,000 a day. I was doing
Yeah.
70,000 IUs. So I think that because there's a lot of studies out there in like PubMed where vitamin D is a major contributing factor when it's super high to kidney stone production. Like calcium oxalate stones form much more rapidly if your levels are too high. So like I think 60 to 65 would be a good range to get the health benefits, the immune system benefits and such without the amplifying the kidney stone chances. But being at like 100, I'm in the danger zone. So I've tried to really cut back my dose and I keep cutting it back and I'm still like incredibly high. It should be noted though, I was in the sun a ton on these runs. So obviously that added to it. So maybe in winter I do need a little bit, but during the summer it's almost like, man, I'm just dropping it out.
Yeah. Yeah. I was certainly below range before I started taking it. And on 5,000 IU's a day, it keeps me like mid 40s, and I'm fine with that. I don't really feel like it needs to be higher. I think there's definitely benefit to having vitamin D not below range. I think once you start getting into 40 plus, there's not a whole lot of evidence that much higher than that is better. I mean, there's some, but people argue about it. Certainly not like 100 plus. But yeah, I just take 5,000 IU's a day, and I just, for me, because I don't really get in the sun that much. I'm pretty pale, so I just kind of like, what? I just take my vitamin D. I get out a little bit, but I'm certainly not outside all the time.
That's really interesting. So 40, 40, 45-ish. That's good to know. Um, because I just absorb it so well where it just like blows my levels up if I supplement with any at all. And now the only supplements I'm taking are vitamin K2, 200 micrograms a day. And then I threw in Chonka. I've been taking that. I don't know if it actually does anything. It can be known to help flush out the kidney stones a little more. So I just throw it in. Those are the only two supplements I've been taking for the last few months. And then I will throw in like creatine when I'm 10 weeks out from a meet because I do plan to compete later in the year. And I'll
Yeah.
probably try Tonkat Ali again at that point. But really I'm just taking vitamin K2 and Chonka now. Uh, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to see everything that's kind of happened in the last few years for you. I didn't know anything about, obviously with like the kidney stones and all that stuff. That's crazy. I mean, I've heard some horror stories with that, or man, some of the like catheters, people who've had like prostate issues, and oh man, it just sounds unreal.
Yeah, I learned real fast. Like I will do whatever it takes to not get one that big again. I never want to go through that. I heard about them. I'm like, all right, kidney stones, how bad could that be? And the actual like peeing out the fragments part, that wasn't bad. But the whole having one in there that was that big, and then the surgeries and the stent and all that was just it was horrific. Like it was so painful. I never want to see it again. Um, so yeah, I learned a lot. Now, as far as you, like, what supplements do you take? Because I kind of feel like vitamin K is one of those ones I'm gonna have in all at all times. And then really outside of that, I my kidney functions, liver functions are always fine. They're always great. So I don't feel the need for things like Tug Cut all times or whatever. I'm really
Yeah.
vitamin
So
D.
I take a few. I'm just real curious. Do you take like with your previous PD usage? I think you've had echocardiograms, right? And they were normal.
Okay, so this is Dave. This is where it gets interesting. I you know Dr. Gillette, Kyle
I
Gillette. He
I
was
think so.
he was the head doctor for Merrick for a while. He went off on his own. And have you heard of the Clearly exams? Like the Clearly.
No.
So there's this new technology as far as like assessing hard and soft plaque. And I'm gonna get that done in the next month or two. So they do a normal like CT coronary angiogram, and then it's like how they interpret it with this technology. So I'm gonna get that done. I'm really stoked about that to see uh, the
Because
extent
wasn't
of.
your LPA high, if I'm remembering?
Yes, sir. That's another reason why I felt there was no choice but to clean up my lifestyle.
Yeah.
From diet to cardio to healthier body weight of like 200 pounds. All those reasons I was like, I can't play around with this because my LP little a is always 260, uh,
Mhm.
which it's just, I don't know. It's one of those things that makes you a little nervous. And I remember when I was 27, I did what the heck's it called? The calcium score, whatever. And I know that's delayed a bit, is what Leo always told me. Leo said it's showing where your plaque was years ago or whatever. So I had that done at 27 and it was like a two. And I was like, oh, a two is really good. And I look and it's,
Wow.
you're not supposed to have any at
Yeah,
20.
yeah, yeah. At
But
27 for
two,
sure.
two means there's plaque. And this
Yeah.
was 7 years old, 6 years ago. And I was like, oh, two is great, and I didn't. So I am very curious to see. I think we'll get a lot of answers from the CT angiogram as far as what that decade of steroid use did, and possibly LP little a, the role that may have. And I think a lot of answers are going to come up from that. So I'm really curious to see the results from that. I'll have to go get that done. It's all set up.
Yeah. Yeah, Peter Tia talks about that, how he tested in his early 30s, I want to say, and he had a four, and how that made him really hyper focus on prevention because, as you said, at that age, you shouldn't have any. And so he tries to get his LDL, or well, he measures ApoB, but for the sake of people who are used to listening to LDL values, I think he wants it like sub 50 to 70, basically. I'm actually running an experiment myself right now, trying to manipulate with diet, and it's changed pretty dramatically. I'll make a whole video on that, but it's one of those things where it's like, well, do you want to restrict yourself so much? It's basically almost no saturated fat, right? It's less than 15 grams a day. So, do you want to restrict yourself that much? And basically, without spoiling the video, I basically saw significant effects, but now I'm going to retest with having like a once a week saturated fat meal, like meaning like if I like yesterday was July 4th, right? So I had burgers, hot dogs, whatever, and then I'll test my blood again next Friday. Because if it's like, hey, you can just always eat lower saturated fat, not low fat, I'm still having plenty of other healthy fats, but low saturated fat and once a week you can have a social activity, then I would say, you know what, like if I can do that with just diet and not add a medication, then I think I would do that. But if it's like a significant difference with eating once a week, I think at that point I would probably accept taking a low dose statin or ezetimibe, something like that, because it's just so restrictive and you have to factor in quality of life and whatnot. At some point it can become very restrictive. I'm definitely curious to see what your CT shows. Have you had imaging of the heart itself? I forget if we talked about this before, like an actual echocardiogram.
No, I've had imaging of most of the other organs, um, because I had all these GI CT checks from the kidney stone issue. Like they were going through it all because they were trying to figure out what was going on. So I've had multiple CTs of like the kidneys, the liver, and that stuff all looks great. The lungs look great, but the heart itself is on tap territory. So I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah,
Um,
I would definitely encourage you to do it. I'd be very curious. I've seen scans of people who have been on gear for a decade and their heart looks completely fine. And I've seen other people who, they go on for 2 years and they have all these problems. It's very interesting. Obviously, there's the genetic component to it. I would suspect with how much weight you've lost and the changes, yours is probably fine. But yeah, I really think you should do one.
oh yeah, I'm excited to. Uh, and we've seen so many people pass away that it definitely wakes you up. And I don't know. That's why I wanted a lot less burden on the body by being a reasonable weight. Like we all want to be muscular, we all want to be strong, but there has to be a balance. So like for me to justify that, I'm like, I need to get as lean as possible. And right now I feel I'm at that point, like,
Yeah.
you know, pretty confidently single digit. And that's a lot less strain. That's a lot less strain on the body, at least. So this is just a much better long-term route, especially with getting more serious about the diet now. I still am incorporating cardio because I don't think it's healthy to run ultra marathons necessarily. I don't think it's healthy to run 100 miles a week. Like that's taking things to another extreme on the other end of the spectrum. But doing some cardio, 2 days of 4 miles and such, and keeping that in shape along with the lifting and keeping the diet pretty healthy, like I think that's going to play a huge role long term. But it's interesting. Yeah, and I've checked, my GFR is like 130 for kidney health, like
Yeah.
100. So all the other organs seem like they're firing on all cylinders, but I am very curious with my genetics as far as LP little a and the abuse of PEDs and specifically trend for years, um, how that's going to affect things and what sort of damage might have been done or if it's reversible. I think it'll be interesting to see, like, given all the lifestyle changes, maybe some of that reverses itself if things come back positively. I don't know. I don't know how that works exactly. I never touched GH. That was one thing. I never was on growth hormone, never IGF-1, never insulin. So there were some of these things. I never took the diuretics that are so popular today, the Lasix. So there were a lot of things I didn't do, but I did do a lot of things. I did tren a lot. I did testosterone in high doses, nandrolone. So I did a lot of things and I didn't do a lot of things, but I was much heavier. I was living an unhealthy lifestyle coupled with a very poor diet, no cardio, high blood pressure unchecked for years, high cholesterol unchecked for years, all that sort of stuff. So it'll be interesting. There's a
Yeah.
lot that can be learned from that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm excited to see the kind of natural comeback here now that you're really able to. I would assume that at this point you're pretty stabilized hormonally. You're going to be, eating well. You're going to be training again. I mean, I'm sure you're going to be able to get to a very impressive drug-free level, both physique-wise. I mean, obviously, if you're already 200 pounds single-digit body fat, maybe you get 10 pounds more muscle, and your strength, I'm sure, is going to shoot back up. So you can still get to a really impressive point.
Yeah, it's well, the diet thing's fascinating too, because for many years I was getting around like 100 grams of protein a day. Um, and now I'm getting 205-ish
Okay.
averaging. I'm
Yeah.
doing a lot of saturated fat, so it's kind of interesting you bring that up. A lot of I do a pound of beef a day, so we'll see.
Wow. Are
Yeah,
you
we'll
taking anything for lipid levels?
no. So we'll see
Oh.
what that's at. Now my ApoB, it was 76.
Hmm.
76 and LDL was 93. And then on the last one where I was eating more junk food, it was 112 LDL, 83 ApoB. Uh, and now, so this is before the diet changes, which have really just been in the last month. So we'll see. So it's a lot more saturated fat, but the overall diet's very clean.
Yeah.
As far as not having. processed foods and such, and a lot more protein. So I'll have to run it back. I tend to do labs every 6 months to note any changes and such. The one thing I've always been trying to bring up since I've come off test, this has been tremendously problematic. Almost, it's not problematic in my day-to-day life. I mean, I really don't feel terrible, but it's frustrating for me. It's a point of frustration on my blood work that I haven't been able to fix. My hematocrit, hemoglobin, and red blood cells are always super low, like always. Like I haven't. It's one thing I can't get back to like a decent range since I've come off. Because when I was on TRT, whatever, it was always like 50, my hematocrit. Now it's always like 38, and I can't get it back to like 45-ish, which is
And
where
what
I
are your
kind of
iron levels at?
pretty terrible as well. So my iron was at the very bottom of the reference range, iron saturation. And it's always like this. And
That's interesting given that you eat a pound of beef a day.
well, that's the change. We're going to see if that brings it up. That was before.
Gotcha.
That was before the beef, but like iron supplementation itself, even in forms like glycinate, didn't do anything. I've seen people take iron in every blood test I've seen it. It doesn't move the needle at all. Supplemental iron does
Really?
nothing. I have never seen it raise anybody's level. It didn't do anything for mine.
Oh, it
And
changed mine pretty much immediately.
that's insane because I swear I've seen it. I tried glycinate. Nothing, no change. I took double the dose, no change. I think this again goes back to some people react to certain things. Like I react to vitamin D very well, but certain supplements don't do anything. Just like the steroid Anadrol. Anadrol never did anything for me.
Hmm.
Like some people blow up on it. Larry Wheels talked about he loved it. Best gains ever. It did nothing for me. Like Halo test and nothing. Um,
Wow.
Trend, incredible. So it's just, I don't know. Maybe we're all different in that way.
Yeah, the two times I've had it, so when I supplemented with iron, and I do supplement with iron now because my hemoglobin and hematocrit would also be low without it. So I do take iron, and then and my ferritin, which is almost like a longer term value essentially. I kind of make an analogy like ferritin is to iron as HbA1c is to glucose. And I mean, that's not a perfect analogy, but just it gives you an idea of, longer term. The only issue with that is ferritin can also increase due to like acute inflammatory responses and whatnot. But in any case, they were both low and I just supplement enough to kind of get them higher. So with when I was doing the carnivore diet, I did carnivore diet for 1 month just to experiment, and my iron levels were above the normal range actually.
Wow.
So yeah, a lot of red meat. So I mean, a pound of beef will probably make a significant difference for you, but given your history, you got to watch the ApoB and LDL levels. It'd be interesting to see how you do with that.
Yeah, I probably need to get that done again sooner than 6 months to see these changes because the idea too behind the pound of beef was to raise hematocrit into a decent range because it's been a point of frustration. It's been like this ever since I came off. I have not been able to get it above 40 really. I think one time I did, but most of the blood tests were always below 40. And then the iron levels were very low as well. Ferritin was very low. It's always like 100-ish. So I just that's something I haven't been able to really solve too well. So I'm kind of seeing if this helps that and if there's any downstream effects as far as that, maybe raising testosterone a little higher. Because the highest the test levels have gotten have been 500, and they've usually been in this 400 range, like 404 now.
How about your
Like,
free testosterone?
well, that's an interesting thing. My free test is always like 5.
Okay,
Uh, and what I've seen, and you could probably expand on this further, like the guys not on TRT or supplementary testosterone, their free test is always way lower than the guys on synthetic testosterone.
for
Like
sure.
synthetic testosterone, one way you can always tell is like I see the free test and it's always 20, 25, 30. And then the guys who are truly clean, it's like 5, 10, maybe 12, but it's super low compared to that. Even guys with a relatively high total testosterone. So my free test, even I tried boron for a while, it didn't seem to do anything at a pretty high dose, and it's like 5. And I
Yeah.
don't know what's going on there because my estradiol is also it goes from 15 to 20-ish usually in that range, fairly low.
Yeah, a lot of guys who take gear, I mean, it brings down your sex hormone binding globulin. And so, therefore your free testosterone goes higher. But yeah, you're right. People who are on TRT, usually it's significantly higher free testosterone relative to total testosterone.
That's what I've seen. So I don't know. I don't get too caught up in the numbers, but it's interesting. It really is.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, man, this was a good podcast. I'm glad we got to kind of catch up because I knew some of the stuff you're doing, but man, the stories with that run, oh God, a lot of respect to you for doing it. Um, you've made my interest go from zero to negative as far as to doing anything like that myself. But more power to you. And I definitely have a lot of respect for the guys who do that. I mean, it seems incredibly difficult. And then, yeah, I'm very interested to see about how you kind of come back with, some of the drug-free lifting and whatnot.
Yes, thanks for having me on, brother. It's always good to touch base, and I'm curious to see what happens with LDL levels.
Yeah, yeah, definitely keep me updated on that. I'm interested and I'd be interested to see any like kind of imaging you do as well.
Yeah, sounds good, man.
Cool. So where can people find you?
Just Pete Rubish Fitness on YouTube, and then just Pete Rubish on Instagram.
Awesome. Cool, man. Thanks for coming on.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you having me, buddy.